This is the Conquering Chaos podcast, and my name is Handre Reinecke. I am the host, but for today, I'm going to be the guest. The part-time host we have here today his name is Jack Wilty. I'll have him introduce himself in a second. The reason I asked Jack to come on here is because he is, without a doubt, one of the closest people that I've gotten to know over the past year specifically. He's a great conversationalist, and I just feel like the conversation that we'll have during this time will be very beneficial in value into getting to know who I am and why I decided to, start this podcast. We haven't known each other for super long, but we've gotten really close in the time that we have known each other just because of our ability to have these amazing, insightful, deep conversations. So Jack, if you don't mind, man, just introduce yourself and then we'll get this thing started.
Yeah, thank you, Handre. I'm Jack Welty. Handre and I, like you said, we haven't been friends for that long of a time, but we met during basketball through being on the same team, and we both kind of had some, various injury things, and we kind of got closer just talking on the sidelines, watching practice, helping the team out, and I think we kind of both got the understanding that we really like to talk about, things like deeper things. Like, sure, we talk about things that every teenager, early 20s talks about, but we love to kind of like dive in depth into the deeper subjects, whether it be religion, talking about, relationships, all kinds of stuff. There's really no limits on it. And I think, just doing that, getting to know you better, it just really, like I said, I think, like I said, we haven't been friends that long, but our friendship is so strong. It's almost like we've been lifelong friends at this point. So yeah, that's a little bit about Handre and I's relationship. If this is the first time someone's listening to you, talk a little bit about, where you're from, what your childhood was like, your upbringing.
Young Handre, I was born in South Africa, and I was born in 2001 in a small town called Bloemfontein. I grew up there. My first language and the only language I knew for the first, portion of my life was Afrikaans. We was the only thing we spoke in our house. And I had two older sisters growing up, and they were like two mothers to me. They helped raise me and really played a huge part in, helping me become the man that I am today. I lived in South Africa for 8 years until 2009. When I was turning 8 years old, we moved over here, specifically to Northern California, and I've been here ever since.
Very, very cool. So we always hear the phrase, everyone's like, I can't ever forget where I came from. You hear that a lot in athletes, people that are famous, singers, songwriters, actors, actresses, all kinds of people. So have you had a chance to actually go back to South Africa to kind of visit and like go look at, ultimately where you came from?
It is a big part of anyone's life, understanding where they came from and their roots and who they are. We've gone back a couple of times, and every time that I've gone back, it's been truly like humbling and grounding, in terms of, multiple things, but, economically, obviously, South Africa isn't up to par with most of America. And so it's very humbling to know that that's where we came from, and that, there are places like that who aren't as fortunate as we are. But it's also, culturally, the thing is it may not be economically rich, at least not where we were, but it's very culturally rich. And, that's a big part of it too. Going back and being in a place where you're not the only person or one out of 100,000, 1 million people that speak Afrikaans, or that, enjoy a good braai, or know what biltong is, even though that's getting more popular now. It's definitely good to be with, as people like to call it, your tribe, the people that you started out your life with and the culture that you grew up in. And it's definitely interesting to, as I grow up, to see the contrast between American culture and more Western culture, and the difference between that and South Africa, and living in a place where when you go on vacation you go to safaris, or you go to the coast, and the coast is so well known down there for being infested with great sharks, and having this beautiful coastline, and Cape Town being the number one city in the world in terms of beauty, and and so it's a big difference in terms of those things. It's definitely very it's very culturally different. I find a lot of pride in who I am and where I come from. Definitely left a big mark on who I am and who I want to become also, and also to like represent that side of myself.
Yeah, that's great because I think one of the best qualities someone can have is just like truly, especially if they're, not born here or they go from one place to the other, just being really proud of where they come from. I feel like a lot of times people want to change into someone that doesn't reflect where they came from, but being proud and embracing where you came from, no matter what, I think that's a really admirable quality to have. But you mentioned too, talking about the culture there. You said it's not the most economically rich area, but the culture is really rich, like you said. And I know a lot of nations that are not the United States. Don't get me wrong, the United States is very culturally rich, but I think other places put a little bit more emphasis on it. So coming from a place like South Africa into the States, the United States, from ages 7 to 8 when you came over, and then pretty much since then, talk a little bit about the transition, that major cultural change.
Speaking specifically from a religious standpoint and a faith-based standpoint, South Africa, I don't know if it's accurate, but on the South African website, they have like this yearly database, and over there it's found that it was like 90 or around 90% of the population in South Africa is Christian or to identify as Christian.
Wow.
Going from that to moving to a place like Northern California, where it's like, as people have used in the past, like a melting pot of cultures and different beliefs and religions, and it's all come together, and it's very diverse, which isn't a bad thing, obviously, but it's very different, it's definitely, it's been a good thing. It has its ups and its downs, to say it that way, because as we said, it really makes you realize who you are and the foundations that you're built upon, and whether you're willing to compromise those for acceptance or for a new set of values that you might have found or whatever. There's a lot of things that go into it. That was my biggest thing when we moved here, is growing up based off of a very Christian household of foundations that are very biblically based specifically, and coming to a place where that's not the priority, or that's not the usual way of living. That's not just how everyone is, which is pretty much how it is in South Africa. And so that was definitely the biggest thing for me, is that the foundations and the morals and the values aren't just known. It isn't just what it is. It's everyone has their own beliefs, and it's almost like no foundation, no structure, and that was definitely difficult for me.
Yeah.
Especially growing up, I didn't necessarily always, buy into the typical teenager way of lifestyle. Even when I was in elementary school, I didn't really always buy into it. I was always kind of a loner, I guess you could call it. I always spent a lot of time alone, just because I didn't necessarily want to, I hate to put it this way, but I didn't want to conform or to become like this other way of living, if that makes sense. I was very, 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 very true to who I was. And that's always been a big part of who I am, is being very independent and being proud of, again, my foundations, my culture, my standards, my values, my morals, all of that. And so I actually grew up not having a lot of like deep, true relationships, because a lot of kids don't understand that, if that makes sense. Because it's a very serious thing to know and to realize and to have that, when you're in elementary school, when you're in fifth grade, you know what I mean? Just kids don't think that deeply most of the time when they're that age. And that was a blessing and a curse. I always ended up spending a lot of time with people that are older because of that. And so I matured very, very quickly. I preferred spending time with the teachers over the students, over my peers. I preferred spending time with coaches instead of my teammates, which I know is like crazy, but I just didn't really enjoy the immaturity and I almost want to say innocence of childhood, if that makes sense. I grew up very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense, and I think we can kind of both relate on the same token. Like growing up for me, it was the same thing. It's hard because most people in elementary,
Mm.
middle school, high school, even in college, they're kind of a product of their environment and things, they're watching, whether it be TikTok, Netflix shows like Euphoria or whatever it may be. Like they're a product of that,
Yeah.
so they're going to focus on things surrounding those areas. So it's difficult finding somebody that you can have a true, deep conversation with and go places where, there's endless possibilities to talk about. So that's really, that's a really good thing. And like staying true to who you are and not, like you said, conforming. I think that just kind of tells
Mhm.
everybody what they need to know about who you are as a person. You mentioned one thing you did mention was, growing up in a Christian household, and obviously South Africa, like you said,
Mhm.
it's a lot of people over there are Christian. So could you kind of speak on your relationship with, God growing up in a Christian household? How was he introduced into your life, and kind of, how you've grown
Absolutely, yeah.
just having him be a part of your life?
Growing up, the earliest memories I have were of going to church. We went to a Baptist church, I believe it was, in South Africa, and I specifically remember the very Catholic architecture, I guess, of the churches that we went to. Very pointed ceilings, you know what I mean? The tall pointed ceilings with the
Sure.
stained glass, and there was this the big pianos. I remember what
Yeah.
they called the huge pianos that just went throughout the whole place, with the pews, the wooden pews, and all of that. And so the earliest memories that I have is of going there, but I don't remember actually learning anything there. I remember actually what we talked about there because I just don't remember that. I don't know why. I just remember the environment. That's the earliest memories I have of going to the church. But I don't really remember, not going to church. Let's say it that way. And as soon as we moved to America, I guess that's the first time when I could really remember more specifics surrounding going to church and all of those things. Growing up, during elementary school, I would say specifically, we went to a local church called Adventure Church. And, I mainly went. And again, in terms of the whole idea of me not wanting to spend time with my peers showed itself again. Because what I would do, I think I did this all the way up until middle school, I want to say, is even though my mom would force me to go to, the elementary school groups or the youth groups that we had, most of the time, well, either one of two things happened. I just skipped that entirely and I would just go with her to the main service, the adult service, or I'd ask her if I could go to both. So either way, like I wanted to be in the adult service. But from that early of an age, I didn't even want to, spend time doing the kiddie, sing song, all of the lighthearted stuff. Like I was a deep person.
Sure.
And from an early age, I started going to the adult services with my mom, and I actually listened too. It's not like I was there just messing around and playing. I remember paying attention and loving the messages. I remember not being a huge fan of worship when I first started there, which is weird because I'm a huge fan of worship now. But I was so invested in the messages, and I was so invested in all of that, and so it's weird. And so grew up going, spending time again, preferring maturity over, I don't want to say immaturity, but innocence. It was that, like I said, I did that pretty much for my entire elementary school years until about 7th grade. I started to move more. I would say at the end of 6th grade, actually, I started to move more into my peer group, if that makes sense. And I started to go to more of the what's called VBS, the vocational or vacational Bible schools, and the middle school groups. And when I started to go on those, and I started to serve more and actually get active, that's when I think I really started to enjoy and actually experience the presence of God and kind of that relationship with him. It took a while for me to actually get there. And I remember a big part of that too is going back to my sisters, seeing their faith specifically growing up it was crazy to me, and that's the other thing. Once I got to middle school, I remember I didn't even spend a whole lot of time with my peer group, even though I spent a lot more time with them than I did when I was younger. I was spending most of my time with the high schoolers, with my sister's group, because they were both in high school, and I always thought that their services were way cooler than our middle school services. So I'd always spend time with the high schoolers. And I was kind of like that poster kid, cool little brother that everyone, I remember being like a little highlight in one of their videos that they made, and having my little part, whatever,
Oh, that's great.
And so I remember with my two sisters, specifically with my, not the oldest sister, but the middle child in our family. Me and her would spend a lot of time, worshiping together. And we actually went to a couple of different places, and specifically, meant for like high school worship and those things. And me and her got really close over that. And so I would say, alongside me getting more involved in serving and the whole community with VBS and middle school groups, and having, the mentors of my life, I guess you could call the role model of my sisters, of their faith in high school. And, and a lot of things is what happened was a lot of their friends from high school were actually my pastors. They were the youth pastors for me specifically. And if I were to talk about like a specific defining moment in my life, or in my Christian life, I should say, it was in, I want to say, the 7th grade summer when we went to a Bible camp at Azusa Pacific in SoCal. This was with the middle school group. Technically it was for middle schoolers, but a lot of the high school youth pastors, our pastors at that time, came with. And, and I remember that experience being like absolutely crazy to me. It was a lot of fun in terms of the events and the stuff we did and the lighthearted things on that side. But the one thing that stood out to me once again was the mature stuff, the deep stuff,
Yeah.
I remember that was the first time me and one of my really good friends at the time, like, broke down and just shared our stories and everything that was going through our minds and our traumas, I guess you could say, even though I look back on it now and realize that we had no idea what that even meant. The pastor, the adult, which was one of my sister's really good friends, that was our youth pastor that I got really close with, that I broke down to. He was the one who really stood in for us and kind of set an example for us and really like listened. And, that's the biggest thing that stands out for me from my like early, truly my Christian, my own personal journey, not just my mom's faith, or not just my family's routine of going to church and stuff like that. That was my first like true personal indication or relationship or effort or breakthrough moment that I personally had with God. And it was after that moment that when we got back from that camp, I ended up getting baptized. And that was when I actually truly committed my life to Christ. And so that's kind of the whole journey of how we got there, to that point.
Yeah, you mentioned something that really, I think, resonates with me. The idea of being vulnerable, especially being a man. I think, in American culture, I'm not too sure about other cultures, but there seems to be some sort of stigma that a male shouldn't be vulnerable. He should be tough, all powerful and stuff like that. But I think that can honestly, and I think we're starting to kind of see with like, mental health awareness and stuff, it can really lead you down a dark, dark road. So yeah, being vulnerable, in your journey through religion towards Christ and all that, I think that's a really powerful thing. And I honestly think, that's one of the things that helped me to just be more vulnerable and not being afraid to kind of, like you said, like break down in certain moments and, ask God or talk to somebody, just kind of explain what you're feeling or what you've been through. So, I think being vulnerable is one of the best things anyone can, anyone can do.
I agree. Adding one thing onto that, just real quick. Yeah, I think it's super important, and in order for us to really, I feel like, in my opinion, in order for you to really want Christ or need to know Christ, or kind of, it almost needs to be a state of desperation. You need to be vulnerable to really understand the need that we have for him, alone, like it's crazy. And it took me a long time to realize it, but as hard as we try to fulfill the needs and the demands of life alone, the more we realize, or the more I realize that I cannot do it by myself, at least. And that took me a long time to realize. And so that's why I said, like, and that's what it shows that in the Bible and many different stories about how God works the strongest and he does the most in our weakest moments. But the thing is we need to get to those weakest moments. And how do we do that? Is we have to open up and we have to be vulnerable and actually allow him to come in and manipulate and almost transform our lives, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think, and again, if we're looking at it, that's just from a biblical perspective and as a Christian perspective. If we're looking at it from a societal perspective, I totally agree, and like we talked about in the past, actually, we talked about this like last week or something, about the whole idea about how for many people, actually just in general, opening up and being vulnerable is way harder. You know what I mean? It takes more courage to do that than anything else, in my opinion. And especially as a man, because it's such even though people say it's okay, people still judge men for being, they call them soft or weak or, you know what I mean? But like, in my opinion, opening up like that and being vulnerable it takes way more courage than, anything else, in my opinion, when it comes to the standard men are held at and the expectations of men, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just kind of going off of that too, obviously growing up, learning about all of the teachings of Christ and, having that relationship with God and understanding, like how to be vulnerable among other things. How has that kind of changed your relationships with others and how you view your peers and how, your relationships may have grown, or talking about, the types of people you want in your life? Just kind of speak on how, God has helped your relationships with others.
That's a really good question. Just some more context, even though growing up a little bit more ahead of the game than maybe your other people, a big thing too, and this is a big problem for a lot of Christians, I feel like, and this is a big thing that a lot of Christians get criticized for, is being too judgmental. That was my big thing growing up. And I realized that I was mature, and I was mature. And I grew up very quickly. But the thing is that I just disregarded people and I didn't give people even a chance because I was too judgmental, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't even open up and or even allow other people to present a case, I guess you could say, or just to be themselves, because I was so judgmental of the things that they were doing that I just wasn't in accordance with who I was. And, it wasn't until I really looked at, this is something I still struggle with today, because, I look at people and again, this is something that me and you have talked about in the past, the whole idea of potential, and I really believe that I try to see the best in people. And then when people aren't living up to their potential, or I guess what I could see there's their potential, I guess it's my opinion, but, like, it hurts me, and that I guess is a form of judgmental of judging as well. You know what I mean? Because it's not necessarily my right to say that, they aren't who they're supposed to be, or, you know what I mean? So that's something I even struggle with today to a certain extent. But, growing up and realizing everyone is born in the same nature. If we look at it from a biblical perspective,
interesting.
We're all born into sin, and we're all born into a nature that causes suffering, because sin causes suffering. And, it's unnecessary suffering as well, sure. And the more I realize that this is the other thing, the more I realize that, like, for me personally, that I can't handle the things of this world. Like I said, the demands, I guess you could say, the terrible facts of life, of being, like, the more I realize that I personally can't handle that, the more I realize my need for God, and the more I realize that why should I, again, be the judge? Like, I'm not the judge for that. And so, growing up, for me personally, realizing how desperate I am for God kind of made me become more empathetic towards others. You know what I mean? Because I thought, again, I was this mature guy that I don't want to say it, but it's true. Like, I thought I was better than everyone because I was mature. And so that instilled into my mind that I just thought I was better than everyone in general. And obviously that's a terrible thing to do, but it took me a long time to realize that I'm just as broken as everyone else is. And and if anything, I'm broken more because I think that way. You know what I mean? And so, and I think I realized that at a decent age, but it took me a long time to actually translate that and realize that brokenness is actually desperation for an identity, for desperation for something more. If that makes sense. It's a need that needs to be met, and it's a need that I cannot, even though I tried, and I'm sure many people have, that I cannot get met in the world. It's a need that's not able to get met in the world. It's the only, and I feel like ever since I've gotten to know Christ better and all my relationship, that it's the one need that I've realized that is really met in a relationship with God and with Christ. The fact that, life is suffering, and yes, human nature and sin are real, and we're born into a life of sin, that causes unnecessary suffering, and there's nothing we could do about it. You know what I mean? And the fact that even though we don't deserve the love and grace of God, and the fact that we don't deserve that he came and sent his own son and died for us on the cross, and all these things, just the fact that like we don't deserve his love, but he still loved us so much he did it anyways. Like that's just, that just the amount of humility that caused in my life personally and my outlook on others. It changed a lot in my life. That's the big thing that I realized in terms of my relationships. That's the biggest thing that's changed in my life, I would say. And again, like I said, it's something that I'm definitely still working on. It's a big thing for me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that totally. And I think one thing that you did say, talking about wanting to help people and like change the way they are, I can resonate with that a lot because, sometimes you can see somebody going down a certain path and you're like, I know that you are so much better than that. You know what I'm saying? And I think like we've talked about this too. Sometimes it's hard to see people make certain decisions, but ultimately we just have to recognize that that's their own path. They're going to find their way. And just, trust them enough that they're going to be fine.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that's one thing to always be conscious of. There can come a little bit of arrogance as you're finding your way, like anything else, But, it seems like you're at a point now after, growing up and kind of learning everything and just kind of like finding your own way through the ups and downs. You're kind of at a good point now in your relationship with him. You feel like you've mentioned, you've been humbled along the way.
Absolutely.
And, the best is yet to come. One thing you always hear, people have their calling, so to speak. You hear it all the time. Doctors, surgeons, it was my calling, lawyers, it was my calling, teachers, all kinds of stuff. So from a religious perspective through God, talk about what you feel like God's calling is for your life. What do you think he is guiding you to do, and like what direction is he leading you? Because I know you have a lot of great ambitions.
Absolutely,
so just try to talk a little bit about that.
I definitely do have a lot of ambitions. I think it's from a more fundamental perspective, I guess you could say, not talking about me, or so this is something I learned recently just about, in general, when it comes to following or knowing and understanding your calling and then following it. I think this is a big thing for a lot of people, especially, at our age group, when you're young adults and like you don't go to high school anymore. And now it's like the world's in front of you and you can be anything. This is the way you could be anything, but you're not anything. You know what I mean? Like you're full of potential and that's it. You know what I mean? Like you have to go and take the potential and what could be and grab that and turn it into something that is reality. And from a religious perspective, something that I realized is, the ultimate example for us is the ultimate leader is God, because that is exactly what he did. It's exactly what he did. If we look at the creation story specifically, that's literally what he did. He went and he took the chaos and the potential of what could be, and he spoke it into existence. He turned chaos into reality. He brought order to chaos and potential and turned it into being and reality. So I think when it comes to calling specifically and figuring out what your calling is, I think it's important to listen and abide by your conscience, because your conscience is something that God gave you. And so therefore, the desires that he put on your heart and the conscience that he gave you was meant to direct you. And the big thing with the conscience is you can look at a lot of people and they will do something, or let's just say they're in the process of trying or deciding whether they should do something. Let's say they're trying to not give in to, let's say, an addiction, right? Let's say candy. Let's say they're trying to get over sugar.
Sure.
They're trying to get over this thing of candy. You know what I mean? And they have this need that comes up. They have this hunger, this craving, and their conscience goes, you shouldn't eat that. And your conscience literally tells you, like, no,
been there.
Like, this is exactly what you're trying to avoid. This is exactly what you need to avoid to become the person that you're trying to be. Then most people, or I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people, they hear that voice and they completely ignore it and then eat the candy and then afterwards get mad at themselves for not listening to that voice. And so.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, and so
I've been there way too many times.
And when we look at it from a biblical perspective, Jesus says that He is the way, the truth, and I can't remember the last part. He says that He is more specifically the truth. Truth is so important, and when you make decisions like that, where you're not abiding by your conscience, when you're literally lying to yourself, and so the big thing, going back to the whole idea of truth, is, God, or when Jesus Christ came to earth and He, became flesh like you and me, he more than just came and, died for our sins and took our sufferings and everything like that. He also came to set the example of what a perfect, sinless human being is. And so when He says that He is the truth and the way, it means that we're supposed to live according to the truth. We're supposed to live according to the way. We can't lie to ourselves about these things. And I feel like I've began to understand that calling, and figure out what my calling is and how I would recommend others do it.
Sure.
Is the most practical thing that you can do is start living according to the truth. And, and once you do that, you realize that the truth is God's plan for you, essentially. And when you live, how do you live according to the truth or the way, I guess you could say? And a lot of people in the Christian, community calls it God's voice. God's voice is speaking to you. And so a lot of people believe, and including myself, that the more you interact with God and the more you yearn and need and are desperate for His voice and who He is, the more you will hear it. And the more you will hear it, the more you'll be able to stay on His path for you. And at the end of the day, that path that He has for you is so much better than anything that you can even begin to imagine. And that's the crazy thing too, is like, I might believe that my calling is one thing. And right now, personally in this season, and it's different than it was, I would say, a week ago. It's different than it was, I would say, a month, a year ago, 5 years ago. My calling right now in this moment would be to communicate and share my thoughts and my feelings on, what it means to be a Christian, and also what it means to, overcome the limitations of your life and how to do that, and then live according to God's purpose. So for me specifically, I think this is probably just because this is the season that I'm in and I'm figuring it out as well, is helping people take, again, the chaos of potential and the potential of their lives, turn that nothing into actually something, if that makes sense. And I feel like the best way to do that at its most fundamental level is leadership. And so I feel like my calling at this specific moment is to be a steward of what God gave me and to lead by example and by my speech and my words as to how exactly we figure out that fundamental question of reality of what's my meaning, what's my purpose, and how do I even figure that out? You know what I mean? How do I turn nothing into something? How can I find meaning and purpose in our sinful nature and suffering? And so I think my big thing right now is one, being a steward of what God gave me. And that means, realizing and using the spiritual gifts and blessings that God has blessed me with to, serve Him and serve His glory and His purpose. Because again, at the end of the day, my belief and thought of what I think is good and amazing and what a great life would look like, and my calling is nothing compared to what God has planned for me and for everyone else that's watching this, for you too, Jack. Like at the end of the day, like you can't even imagine. You can't even imagine what he has in store for you and the plan that he has for you. You know what I mean? And so that's the biggest thing, and it changes. That's why I think I said that, like, again, like my calling, I feel like has changed, and I think it will continue to change because, again, I don't know really anything. Like I said, like I thought I'm growing up, I thought I knew everything, and I thought I was mature and I was better than everyone. But the more I've grown up, actually, the more I've realized that I don't know anything.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That like I actually don't know anything, and there is one person in this world that does know everything, and the only person that is God, because He's the only one that's actually orchestrated our lives and laid out the path.
Yeah.
He knows exactly what's going to happen. And so my big thing is focusing on Him and His calling for me, and on His voice and who He wants me to be today. And, what does He want me to do today? One of my mentors, my spiritual mentors, and honestly, like a father figure in my life, what he told me growing up when I was, having some anxiety in my life and stuff like that. What a good analogy that he gave me, and this is actually biblically based too, is that imagine you're in a big room, right? This room is completely dark, but this room is your life. Sure. This is the beauty that God has planned for you, right? But it's all in darkness right now. You can't see any of it. It's all dark, but it's there and it's real. And all you need to do is, go forward and take steps forward to go and get it, if that makes sense. But the thing is like, you're so scared to take a step because you don't know what's in front of you.
Yeah.
And so his big thing is, and this is, again, it's biblically based. God shines the path before our feet. He lights the path before our feet. And so all we need to do, we don't need to worry about what's at the end of this room or on the other side of the room. We need to worry about what God is lighting up for us at our feet. What's the next step that I could take today to become more like His Son Jesus, or to impact his kingdom, or to serve the purpose that He wants me to serve today. And so it's, although I think, and this is something that I posted the other day on my Instagram story, is the whole idea of, I can't remember specifically exactly who it was. I want to say it's Winston Churchill, but I'm not sure. The whole idea of planning and how plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Because the whole idea is like, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. You can plan for something, but it is not going to happen most likely. Yeah. But planning itself is something that you cannot lose.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? It's something that you can't live without. Like, you need to plan. And so, you know what I mean? And so it's like the whole idea surrounding that. So that's kind of how I've come to this realization and this point where I'm at. I realize I have a calling for my life, and I know it's there. And the calling that I'm following right now is the one that I feel like God has put before my feet, if that makes sense, that He's lighting up. And so my big thing is just following the path that He has laid out for me. And I don't obey and abide in His word and who He is, then I'm not going to live the glorious, victorious life that He promised us. That He promised me. If this is the biggest thing that I realized growing up is like, I can't do this alone. It just goes back to the need and desperation for Him. And so my focus is on His plan for me and His vision.
Yeah, no. And one thing you mentioned too, like kind of being a steward of His word, being a steward of God, and like kind of spreading His message towards others. For example, like myself, as of late, when I say as of late, I'd say like the last couple of years, I've been wanting to improve my relationship with God and just know more, not necessarily like go super in depth, but just kind of, familiarize myself better with Him. And, you've done a really good job of kind of teaching me and helping me understand certain aspects of not just God, but, Christ and the Bible and all kinds of stuff, religious related, and as it pertains to Christianity. I think you've done a really good job kind of, serving Him and, serving His calling for you, so to speak. Just talking, not even talking about me anymore, but it's kind of going towards on a broader scale. What kind of led you to, do you think that calling of, wanting to be a steward of His word kind of helped you in developing this podcast? Because I just kind of want to get an understanding and have the audience get an understanding of what ultimately led you to start this podcast?
The biggest things that I can think of is, like I said earlier, listening to God's voice. And like you said, being a steward of the things he's given me. And I really feel like he has given me the ability to speak and influence and impact other people's lives through my words and my actions and, all of that. I've been a personal trainer for the past two years approximately. And I've loved exploring the physical side of things and, our ability to push our physical limits, explore just the physical side of things in terms of our bodily, abilities, I guess you could say. And I still love it to this day. But the biggest thing for me, the more that I've realized is, again, I have a passion for that, but I feel like right now my calling is to mentor, disciple, and counsel people in the kingdom of God and to help people more realize their identity in Christ. And again, like if you realize your identity in Christ, you realize that you can't lose when you have an identity in Christ. You know what I mean? Because it's like, the thing is that he's already won all the battles that you could fought. And the only thing you need to do is realize that, to speak it, I guess you could say. I guess confess is a good word. Confess your belief, I guess that's the best way to put it. And to put your trust in thoughts in everything, like to live again according to the way and the truth. That's kind of like the way to do it. And so I kind of realized that just sticking to what I was comfortable with, which is the physical stuff, the physical training and the fitness. And even though I don't necessarily think comfortable is the right word, but I realized that that's not necessarily the best thing always. A big thing for me with this podcast, like the hesitancies and the things holding me back from sharing my thoughts on the spiritual and mental side of things was, again, it was doubt and insecurities and things like that, and I realized that with me holding those things back, well, two things. With me holding those things back from people is super selfish, especially if those are, those are things that are interesting, are spiritual gifts and things that God gave me to be a steward of and to build up and to use in this world to impact and influence other people. Might be someone out there that I might talk to or that might see this podcast that could be depressive or have an extreme anxiety disorder, that just one word could completely change their life. And so the more I thought about it, and the more I realized that, like, yes, and again, this is going back to the whole idea of I'm super broken. And as I grow up, the more I realize that, the more I realize how broken I really am, the more I realize how desperate I really am for God. And that made me, again, become empathetic towards other people, because then I realized, as much as they can look for questions of meaning and purpose and all those things in the world, they're going to have a hard time finding it in anything else but him. And so, I look at those things and I realize that God gave me the gift of speech and the ability to influence others through my words. And if I'm not using that, then, well, again, I'm not living according to what he wants from me, and I'm just being selfish. Potentially, if we were to be extreme about it, saving people's lives, actually, exactly. That's the next thing. That's the second point that I have, right into it, in terms of saving lives. Like, that's the gift of, as you said, Jesus Christ and his death for us. When we're born into this nature of sin and who we are as human beings, we are born into a world as a fragile, temporary being and something that is so much greater than us. We're born as one person in a society that's made up, or say a world that's made up of billions. And a timeline, the amount of time we'll spend on this earth can be counted in decades on the 10 fingers in our hands. And that time alone is a fraction of the time, of the universe, or let's just say of being itself, how long being's been around. You know what I mean? And if you look at all those things, and you're like, dang, that's super pessimistic. Nothing we do is going to matter. Like, we're not going to impact any lives. Like, it can get you into a real nihilistic state. But, there's two different ways that we can look at it when it comes to that. And the one way is, statistically, every person knows approximately 1,000 people in their lives. That means that for every one person that you're away from 1 million. Every two people you're away from 1 billion people. And if you think about social media and the impact of social media now, like that's even more profound and more true.
Wow.
One, there's the more practical and real world example, I guess you could say, of realizing that your actions and inactions really do matter. Every single thing that you do or do not do is going to impact someone's life. And so if you start living according to that, you realize that every decision that you make needs to be the best decision that you can make and the best person that you can be. But yeah, so, and the other part of that, the more profound and amazing part is the part of Jesus Christ and what he did for us. Being born into, we're as human beings, again, we're born into a nature of sin that causes unnecessary suffering in our life. Again, we're fragile human beings, and it's a huge universe and a huge world with billions of people. Like we're indefinitely like so small and fragile. Like we're super fragile. We die we could die very, very easily. And you know, and that's the thing. That's for a lot of people is people are so scared of death because they don't know what's after. And that's the thing is like we're born, this nature that we're born into.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we are fragile. And that's the other part of it is like with Christ coming and dying for us, when he died for us, he gave us the opportunity to live eternally with him in heaven. And it's scripturally based. It's in the Bible, you know? And so that gave us the opportunity to do that. And when you realize that, then you realize you don't have to live in this life of unnecessary suffering. This body that we have,
absolutely,
it's just a car, a mode of transportation that's carrying something that's worth so much more, and that's something that cannot die. We've been given that as a gift. Again, we did not deserve it. We don't deserve it still. But we're still giving it out of love and out of grace and out of how good God is. That's the other part of it. And so for me to think and how the more responsibility you take for the things in your life, the more you're going to, find meaning. And for me, it goes back to the whole idea of it's more than just your actions that are going to impact those potentially billions of people. It's your inactions too. It's the things you don't do. Even further, going back to your conscience, it's the things that you know you should be doing, but still don't do. I think, it is a calling and it is a passion, and it is something that I love to speak about. I just realized the impact and the stewardship of what God has given me can really affect so many more people's lives. And me withholding the truth of the one solution that anyone has ever found in all of time, that all psychologists and philosophers have found, to the answer of suffering in life and the answer of death, like the one thing that actually answers those things and that has been around, that still hasn't been forgotten, even though it's been around for thousands of years. The fact of that and me withholding that from people, like, it's just not fair. You know what I mean? And on top of that, God calls us to do exactly the opposite of that. God calls us to share the gospel and share the message. There's a lot of parts to it, and so that's that's a long, very long detoured route of why I started this podcast. It's super uncomfortable for me. I gotta say again, Jack, you're making this way easier for me, just because if I were to be talking to a camera, it would have been different. But having this conversation with a real human being that I've had conversations with before makes this a lot easier. But again, like even still, you know what I mean? Like this is still very uncomfortable for me to put this out there, because I have been living a life of me only putting out the physical fitness Handre, the physical trainer, personal trainer Handre, and not really exploring this side of me as much. And so it's scary. But the thing is like God has fought our battles already, and he has already won all of them. And if we put our trust in him, then it's like, what do we have to worry about?
Yes.
Our worry and our anxiety are only things that are used as weapons from the devil and from the enemy as attacks to keep us from experiencing the peace and the joy that God has given us. And so, I'm definitely still working on it. Yeah. Again, it's scary. I have some anxiety about it and all of those things, but I think in the long run, it is, like we said earlier, I think it's part of my calling in this moment and what God has called me to do for this very specific season of my life.
That's great. And I think with a lot of people, they're reluctant to start something like a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever. They're reluctant to just kind of jump in and put their hands into the fire, so to speak, because, we're in such an age now where everything that matters seems to be clicks, views, comments, all kinds of stuff. But like you said, if you can just reach one person that may really be going through it, is really depressed, has major anxiety, that is just lost in their life, if you can reach one person and, help them, and like you said, even like save their life or change their life, that's it's incredibly powerful. And, like you said, because I've known you for a while, like having all of the knowledge that you have, passing that on is such a big thing, because, a lot of people, it's very easy just to keep all of that knowledge inside and just kind of store it and follow it yourself. But, being unselfish and sharing, I think one of the big things about, if you look at Christ, he was very big on sharing, that's key. And the fact that you're doing that, I think that's very special. Even how you mentioned, like being a physical fitness trainer and a personal trainer, like, for those of you who don't know, Handre is really skilled and knowledgeable about that. He's got me on a plan right now, got me feeling really good about myself lately. But, jumping into something that's not the most comfortable and kind of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, I think, that's huge. And then you'll look back on this and I feel like it'll be one of those things like, I am so glad I did that. Even if I was a little bit nervous or if I was a little bit reluctant to get in. But one thing I am very curious about is the name, Conquering Chaos. I think, obviously life all around us is insanely chaotic, especially, living in a city or a suburb like Sacramento, Rockland, Roseville. There's so much going on. So talk a little bit about, how you came up with the name.
One last thing about why I decided to start this podcast. This came to mind as you were speaking, and this is another big thing. And I guess, again, honestly, super honest about what I'm going to say here is, like for me personally, it is super important, like you said, to share and to not hold that knowledge back for myself. But again, like I realized, and I have been realizing more and more recently, I am not anywhere near perfect. I'm very unrefined, I guess you could say. I'm 20 years old, and I forget that sometimes. And so the other big thing for me starting this podcast, and you'll see it, and the big reason I chose to do this in an interview style podcast is so that I can have conversations, one like this, with other people, because I realized that, the importance of conversation and the purpose, I should say, of conversations and relationships is to learn something and to grow. Mm-hmm. Most conversations are to further yourself as a human. Like people, unless it's like gossip, I guess you could say, but even in that manner, you're still learning something new. Just not might be the best, but I mean, still, conversations are about growth, about making each other better. And so, that's a big reason why I chose to do this exactly in an interview style. One is because I realize how much I have to learn and how I don't know anything, and how there's so many other people in the Christian community, but also just in the world that know so much more than me. So that's why, my curiosity is a big reason why I wanted to do it this way. And so others could learn from them as well, and from our conversations. And then the other reason I did it for an interview style is because I realized my story doesn't necessarily compare to a lot of people's stories. Yes, I know we didn't really go into it into depth in terms of my testimony and the things that I went through and grew up in, the things that, the bigger traumas and stuff like that. We didn't really get that deep today, but I just got to say for me personally, like, that's not to compare my trauma with anyone else's and my story with anyone else's, but like, there's definitely been people that have gone through a lot worse than I have, and that have gotten through it and that have found Christ in it. And so that's another big reason too, is because even though I might not relate to this one person specific, circumstance and what they're going through, I know that there is someone out there that does, and someone out there has gone through it. Like, that's for sure. It's just a matter of finding them. You know, and so that's another big reason too. Like you said, like if you say one person, but that's the thing is like if that one person doesn't like me because they can't relate to my story and how I grew up, then that's okay. Like I want to find someone that person does like and can relate to, and you know what I mean. That's the other reason for it being an interview style. You know, alongside this specific podcast, what I'm going to be posting as well are not only, you know, interviews from her, I guess you could call it, interviews from people from the present reality. But I'm also going to be reading a lot of books and putting a lot of book reviews up because I believe, you know, there's been a lot of great minds and a lot of great thinkers and Christians and philosophers. And so a lot of the other portion of things that I'm going to be putting out is going to be focused on book reviews and stuff like that. And in a sense, interviewing people that aren't necessarily alive anymore, but that still are great minds. And so, sorry, I just wanted to add that because it came to mind. In terms of the name Conquering Chaos, it goes back to the idea of us talking about what we talked about earlier in terms of chaos and order and how God set the example for us in terms of how to bring order to chaos and turn chaos into reality and being. He tells us in his word that, you know, he gives us the Holy Spirit. So his Holy Spirit resides in us. And through that Holy Spirit, we were given abilities that he provides. I mean, obviously it's not our doing, but he's working through us. He's doing his power through us. And so in a way, that creation story is just it can be looked at as a metaphor and as an example of what we need to do with our lives. And the reason I use the word conquer is because, and the Bible also says that we are more than conquerors. We are meant to grow and to conquer the unknown, the land that we haven't necessarily, you know, been to. When I'm saying conquering chaos is the potential. It's what we don't know in our lives. It's that scary thing. It's the thing that made you scared of the monster or the monster that was beneath your bed or in your closet. Like it's a thing of what could be there. It's the potential. It's the you know what I mean? Like that's chaos. That's potential. It's the unknown, in a better way to put it. It's the thing that is outside of your known territory, the thing that you are not in control of, I guess you could say. And so when we look at conquering chaos, it's meant to remind us of that in a certain way, and that we shouldn't let fear of the unknown and fear in general and let that potential go to waste. That we are meant to be, and God has given us the power to be more than conquerors and to conquer the potential of the unknown, and to turn nothing into something, because we have the ability to do that. And there's many references in the Bible specifically about how we do that. The biggest one is our speech and our words. And again, we go back to the truth. The truth is the best thing that we can do for ourselves in terms of bringing that nothing into something, because the truth is reality and lies are deception and false and fake. No matter what, if you lie and deceive and whether that's lying to yourself or speaking out your lies to other people, you're trying to live in a world that doesn't exist in a certain way. And that always backfires on people. Our job is to conquer the chaos of the unknown. And the name is just a reminder, and a reminder to you and a reminder to myself that we are more than conquerors. And the longer name, the name I initially started out with, but it was a little bit too long, was Conquering Chaos Through Christ. Specifically because we all can only conquer the suffering and the sin of this world. We can only answer the questions of the big, fundamental, scary, terrifying questions of reality through Christ. It's the only answer we've got. And again, people have looked for them everywhere else and everything else. And the only place that I found it and that I've heard, you know, and that I've seen most people have found it is through Christ. And so that was the original name. That's the long name. Know that, yes, we're conquerors, and yes, we are meant to conquer the chaos in our lives and to turn the potential of what we could be into what we are. But the thing is that we cannot do that alone. So that through Christ, that second portion of what it would have been is very, very important. Yes, we're conquerors. Yes, we're meant to conquer the chaos in our lives, but we cannot do it alone. We can only do it through Christ. He's the only one that can give us the power and the Holy Spirit that he has and that he is in us in order to give us the sound mind the power and the love and the ability to go and conquer that chaos, because alone we're not enough. So that's where that name kind of came from.
Yeah. Okay. I absolutely agree. There's a lot of things, especially now with social media, the political climate, COVID, all kinds of stuff. There's like a million different things, firing at you. In a sense, like you said, it's chaotic, but being able to sort of control that and like it says in the name, conquer that and stay true to who you are and really, stay focused on your value system, in this case, like your relationship with God, and keep striving towards your dreams and goals and stuff like that and staying true to who you are. Like you're going to ultimately, that's how the most successful people, not just, on the outside, like money, success, all that, that's how the most successful people intrinsically on the inside live their lives. You can be distracted all you want, but at the end of the day, if you're okay, if you can go to sleep at night knowing that you are okay with who you are and your relationships with others, whether it be God, your friends, your family, your significant other are okay, that's, I think that's the true, thing you're striving for. On this podcast, there's going to be certainly people that have a relationship with God already, right? But there's also going to be people that, may be on the fence. They might be thinking, I don't know if I want to, embark on this journey, or if they're just starting their journey, what's one tip that you would give somebody to kind of, grow their relationship with God, or I don't know, sort of, really embrace, everything for what it is? Like, what's one piece of advice you would give to, someone like myself who's relatively new on their journey with God and through Christ?
The most practical tip I could give is to spend a lot of time in the Word and so in the Bible, because the more we realize and the more of the stories we actually read in the Bible, the more we realize that those stories and those things are about us. At the most practical level, I would say just spend time in the Word. And the thing is when you spend time in the Word, and the Word starts to speak to you, and the Word is God. And so that's the second part of what I would say. And this is more of a belief. You need to have a yearning and a need to learn, because you can go in there and you can overanalyze it, and you can do what a lot of progressive Christians are doing nowadays, and look at the Bible and pick out what you like about it and leave out the stuff that you don't like, and or take it and then manipulate it, or just change the wording to suit your ideology or whatever it is. But I think it's important to have actual yearning and need to hear, or a desperation to hear God's voice. I would say that's definitely the place to go. A big thing too is prayer, which is something that's difficult for a lot of people to understand, especially for beginners. Talking to yourself, I guess, what a lot of people would call it. If they're beginning out, it feels like they're talking to themselves. And that's definitely hard. I mean, think about like literally why I invited you on this podcast, why I wanted you here, so I wouldn't be talking to myself. It's definitely tough for people to realize. But the thing is like the more you talk to God, and even if it doesn't feel like you're talking to God, it feels like you're talking to yourself, the more you'll hear his voice. And so the more you'll pray. And so I would say, one, begin by asking yourself, this new beginner, begin by asking yourself what it is that you truly are trying to get out of God. I guess is the best way to put it. That sounds bad, but that's what it really is. Otherwise, you wouldn't pursue it. But what are you really trying to get out of this? Like, are you really trying to have a relationship with God? And are you really, really trying to understand? Or are you just searching for create something that isn't necessarily the truth, but that will make you feel better in the moment? Like, I feel like that's the first level, and this isn't practical, but that's the first level, is that you need to have the right intentions. And we can definitely go into that. A big thing with having a religion such as Christianity and having a relationship with Christ is the amount of comfort it provides. And this is something that I read in C.S. Lewis's book recently, is the fact that like the big, appealing factor of Christianity is its comfort. And obviously, that makes sense. Again, the whole thing we're talking about this entire time is that life is sin. Human nature is sin. And because of that sin, we have a life of suffering. Therefore, we need something like God and something like that to give us comfort. And it's a great quote that he puts in his book, Mere Christianity, where he talks and he says that if we seek comfort, we won't find truth. We will only find despair. but if we seek truth, then we will find comfort.
Okay.
And that's just it's an interesting quote. It's a crazy quote.
Interesting.
You know, it just kind of, it makes you think, you know, and then we go back to the idea of what.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Truth.
Yeah.
You know, God is truth. Jesus is truth. And so if you're searching for truth, you will find comfort. But if you're searching for comfort, you will only find despair. And in order to, I feel like in order to really know what comfort is, you need to know what discomfort is first.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
People need to first, as Christians, we can preach and we can try to explain the yearning and the need that we have for God and that everyone has for God and how disadvantaged we are. But I feel like nobody will truly understand until they've truly felt that despair of trying to find comfort by searching for comfort, by searching for things outside of God and realizing that you'll always fall short, that there's always going to be a hole in your heart that's going to be God-shaped. To a certain extent, I think people first need to realize the suffering side of life. They need to realize the discomfort. They need to realize the sin they're born into. They need to realize that their anxiety and their depression and their doubt are not things that are meant for human beings. Human beings the way God created them. Let's say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
God's creation did not include depression and sin and anxiety.
Yeah.
It didn't include those things. And when you realize that, then you realize that you don't have to live in a depressive life. I think intentions are important. Most practical, get in the Word, even if it's just a little bit each day. The more you read it, the more it's going to read you. The more you try to understand the stories of the Bible and the Word, the more you realize that those stories, again, are about you and your life and what you're going through. And you'll start to see it all just come together and realize how relatable and how true, again, truth, how according to the truth the Word is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip, you know, just kind of diving into it. And like you mentioned, you need to know what, you know, discomfort feels like to feel comfort, and everything. For every feeling, there's always an opposite. You need to know how each one feels, I feel like, in order to really, you know, make the most of your life. As this podcast goes on, you know, episode after episode, I know, just knowing you're going to have countless testimonies, different situations that have kind of touched you in a sense, you know, through God. You know, when you first told me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's one of those things that's almost hard to believe in a sense. But I've had similar experiences too. It's like, I can believe it. You know what I'm saying? And so I just think those things, that's going to be a really interesting theme as we go on, just to kind of hear how he's kind of helped shape you and take you from, you know, some of the toughest traumas or the darkest times in your life, and kind of gotten you out of that and make you see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think that's going to be something that's really, really special to see. If we want to watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, where can we find you?
So,
can you kind of describe where?
The video version, it'll be on YouTube. It'll be under my name, Handre Reinecke, so HANDRE REINECKE. And you'll see that there will be a playlist on there called Conquering Chaos Podcast, and that will be the location for all of these. And then there'll be clips on there as well from the podcast. In terms of the audio versions, they will be on Spotify and you know, iTunes. And
great. No, that's gonna be really great to listen to, and to kind of, you know, see what kind of guests you get on here. Not just their testimony, but like I alluded to earlier, some of your testimonies as we kind of go on. You did mention you sometimes, and actually for those of you who don't know, I follow Handre on Instagram, and every single day between, you know, just life lessons or things he's gotten from scripture, all kinds of things, really good stuff, really powerful stuff. So if someone wants to follow you
pretty much
on Instagram,
all my other social media,
where can they find you?
First, last. So Handre, HANDRE, Reinecke, REINECKE. You'll see pretty much all other social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you know, all of those other places are going to be Handre Reinecke.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Yeah, no, I highly recommend, not just as his friend, but just as a person, I highly recommend following it. You know, every day there's always something inspirational. I'm someone that kind of, you know, I'm not lazy, but I can kind of get in my slumps here and there, and I kind of see something he'll post or him working out or doing something. I'm like, you know what? I gotta take that action. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, make something happen in my life. So that's really good. But Handre, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I want to say I appreciate you, man, a lot. You know, like you said, I know you're going through your own things. I know there's a lot of things going on in your life, man, but you've been a solid rock foundation as in terms of our friendship and helping me out with a lot of things. And, I appreciate you coming on here. Like I said, I do not even imagine how difficult this would have been. The things that I would have talked myself out
Absolutely.
of doing this, the things I would have told myself and all those things. I mean, I would have, you know what I mean? It'd be so much easier. Like this is my one thing. And this is something that I've come into grips with recently. It is so the profoundness of understanding that we are meant to be in communities. We're meant to have a tribe, and it's not just your 1,000, 2,000, 100,000 followers on Instagram. No, that's not your tribe. You're meant to have a close knit community of people that can call you out for the things that you want. And I sincerely say that this man right here, Jack Welty, without a doubt, is one of those people. I know that he'll call me out if there's anything that I'm doing that that is not what I'm not supposed to be doing. That's what I would say. That's just the way I'm going to leave this. It's an introduction into who I am. I hope you guys got to know me a little bit better during this podcast. And I'm hoping that Jack will return in the future because he's also a very, very deep thinker. And as you guys can tell, we definitely have a pretty good ability to have deep and intellectual conversations that can definitely improve each other's thinking abilities, and we bring out the best of each other in terms of our conversations and what we bring to the table. So yeah, man, I just really appreciate you coming on here. And like I said, man, I hope you return.
Yes, sir. Likewise, brother. No, it's great being a part of this, the first episode. I'm excited for what's to come.